from what Jay said was that you can be yourself in a place like this because we're all writers and we all get it to a certain degree. We like to be alone. Not all of us, obviously. Some of us are very social, very extroverted people, but a lot of us, really, this is not our natural state. You know, the wheeling, dealing, networking, handing out business cards is not what we would prefer to do. And I think it presents modern writers with a really interesting conundrum, which is we have this myth of the writer that we kind of still exalt, even though it's very antiquated. It's like the writer hunched over the typewriter with like the stack of manuscripts in the drawer and then like the corkboard filled with rejection slips, and it's still really part of our collective mythology. And I think what's really interesting about that, for me at least, is that in my head, that's the vision of the writer, this typewriter. I think that's so interesting that a typewriter would be still a symbol we associate with writers, because a typewriter is like the least sociable tool we have as writers. They are heavy, they are loud, they require stacks of paper, even portable typewriters were never really that portable. So I thought it was really interesting that we have this thing because like it demands closed doors and thick walls and stacks of paper, silence all but for this clacking sound. And I thought that being a writer allowed us, or I guess actually required us to isolate ourselves from the world. That's kind of part of the appeal, right? It's, for us introverts, it's like the perfect career choice. All of the glamour and none of the people. Where do I sign up? That's great. But there's a reason that the story is an old one. We hold on to this mythology despite its increasing irrelevance, and I obviously bought into it too. So I actually just want to know, how many of you write on laptops at least some of the time? Okay. How many of you write in coffee shops, or in the library, or on the bus? Yeah, cool. Me too. So on laptops, we usually have Wi-Fi connected. And those without the requisite self-control often are interrupted by Twitter or Tumblr or email while we're supposed to be working. And we have all these wonderful ways of distracting ourselves from the work. And I have tweeted about writing as I've been writing. Has anybody else done this? No? Oh, come on. There we go. But I've also joined others on Twitter, like at 3 a.m. when the streams are quiet, to help us achieve our goals. Right? So we'll say, okay, we're all going to go for a word count, right? We're going to headway for it, and then in an hour we're going to meet back up on Twitter, and we're going to see how we did, right? And that to me is awesome, because it is this sociable aspect of this very solitary thing that I think feeds both needs in a certain way that's really special to me. And it's cool because we're connected through a window to the whole world, and it's the same window we use to do our work. Same one. We're separated by pixels between social and isolated, which is really cool to me. And so I actually ride on the bus every day on my daily commute, and as someone who writes about sex, writing in public has inspired some very interesting conversations with nosy strangers. No typewriter or even notebook. It's just a glowing screen with very crisp, clear font telling everyone around me with a good pair of eyeglasses exactly what is going on in my brain at that moment that I'm writing that down. Which is very intimate. A little bit too intimate, obviously, but it's fascinating how that works to me. So writing, like everything else in our lives, has become this social experience. Writing used to be the most isolated career we could imagine. I fell in love with the idea of writing novels when I read Jack Kerouac's Dharma Homes, where he literally writes alone in a cabin on a mountain for 2 months on the peak of a mountain called Desolation, right? There's no more archetypal solitude as a writer than you can get than that. I love that idea because I'm like, 2 months? Nobody? Cabin? Mountain? Yes. Yes. I haven't done that yet, but I'd like to. But the reason I haven't done it is because it's dead. It's not really a real story that most of us have. Most of us are writing our books while the kids are screaming in the living room, or we're doing it between and on our lunch break at our office, right? We have a lot of other things going on in our lives that interrupt this writing. Very few of us are privileged enough to remove ourselves from daily life to go create a magnum opus on a mountain somewhere. So the physical distance between the writer and the reader is dead, and so is the temporal distance. I finished my second novel in January of last year, and it was in so months between finishing the draft and finishing the product. So forget about that. I mean, you have to even forget about that 4 months if you're a blogger, right? You have an idea, you make the idea, you write it, you blog it, and then people criticize your punctuation. And you're like, I wrote that in 20 minutes, and I didn't prove it because I had something so important to say. But the temporal spaces is completely removed. We were talking about that a little bit in the marketing panel today. Which is actually really exciting to me because I get to still feel my book when it's already in readers' hands. Like the book isn't gone from my brain by the time that other people are reading my book, which can make for really harrowing moments when people respond to the book because it's not over for me yet. You know, I haven't moved on to something else. I actually have this very real, very visceral feeling of the book when people are saying, oh my God, that character, why did they do that? I'm like, oh my God, it hurts. It hurts so much. Nobody laughs at that, but it's so real. And I think that's really beautiful. It's challenging. It can really hurt. But it's actually really beautiful because this distance is dying. So we write in public, and we share drafts immediately, and we blog in public, and we think out loud. And quite often, we suck in public. And we find out immediately thereafter. And this is actually what I wanted to talk about today, sucking in public. It's something I've gotten fairly good at. And unfortunately, /fortunately, I'll have more opportunities to do so in the future. And I want to just apologize in advance for using a vernacular. But actually, sucking is really a very carefully chosen word here. Because sucking is not failing. It is not quitting. Sucking, as the kids use it, is a highly malleable word. Everything from having a cold to losing a loved one sucks, right? So sucking can be all your fault, or completely out of your control. It can be something you post without reading, something you say without thinking, something you believe or espouse, whether it's unexamined or highly examined. It's something that people tell you you do, or possibly, more likely, more often, something you constantly tell yourself. It can be your art, or your personality, or your circumstances. It can just suck, man. I think the way that people use traditional publishing models helps us distance ourselves from the suck. This is particularly, if only true, at the big houses, where there are layers upon layers of distance between the author and the reader, where queries are rejected over and over, where acquisitions are guided specifically by market research and trends. Books are edited many, many, many times. Dozens of professionals are sifting through it to identify and discard any of the lingering suck, you know? Designers scrub and polish, publicists do the song and dance, agents act as go-betweens between author and the public. These are all really important things that help prevent sucking. And as an author, if you can make it through this gauntlet, it's as though you're guaranteed not to suck, right? I mean, sure, mediocre books get published all the time, but the traditional publishing model helps those books be the best mediocre books that they can be, right? And in the publishing world, the large publishing world, sucking isn't producing mediocrity, it's losing money, right? And losing money means losing readers, which means fighting to stay alive. It's a very real fight that especially the larger the company is, the harder it has to fight to not lose that bottom line. In the writing world, though, for people in this room, sucking is making bad art. In the human world, sucking can mean all sorts of things. So I know what it's like to suck in public, because by being in public, you're going to suck every once in a while in front of other people. To suck is human. To survive is divine. So, to suck in public means to be vulnerable. How's this volume, by the way? Is it better this way? Okay. So it means to be vulnerable, it means to be transparent, and it means to be uniquely you. The only people who risk sucking are the people doing things, being in the world, sharing some sort of truth, which is the only cachet we really have nowadays. Media is cheap. Messages are cheap. Even talent, while not ubiquitous, is prevalent enough to be cheap. What people are looking for is connection with people who are both talented and authentic. Authenticity is still really rare, and will continue to be rare, and because of that, it is prized. Earlier this week, I saw a viral post about a photographer who took selfies while sharing news with her loved ones that she had a terminal illness. Has anyone seen this series? Yeah. It was fascinating to me because, like, the pictures aesthetically were nice. They were nice looking pictures, but that's not why people were sharing this. It was because her authenticity was so intense. And you could feel this emotion. I'd never met this woman, but I was so invested in not her life, but her ability to share her life with the people that mattered. It was like a window into a completely unique world that I had never experienced. It was so intense. And that's why people share the post, because they are still impressed, like deeply inspired by the audacity to be thoroughly human in front of other people. This is the currency that we are dealing with, to be fully oneself in front of other people. Look at Philip Seymour Hoffman. I was mentioning him in the marketing panel too. I've never really taken the death of a person I never knew as hard as I actually took his death. It was weird. I actually felt kind of strange about it. I felt kind of creepy, like, am I playing into some sort of like Hollywood fame thing? But I definitely saw the humanity in that man. Like, the way he did his art, his willingness to be ugly in front of other people was so real. And that's why that moved me, because his art was so real and so authentic. Even if he was playing a different role, he hit on a universal truth that addressed such fear that most people have of being the ugly, blubbering, horrible, meek, or whatever. All these negative traits we might have of ourselves. To be able to do that in front of other people and hit on something true, you can't help but feel that. Because being human in front of other people is really hard. Almost impossibly hard. Very few people ever actually manage to do it. Because all of us, writers or not, have become accustomed to sharing only our best face. It's how we're supposed to get jobs, get dates, get deals, get published, be on Facebook. How many of you have that friend who you know is going through a hard time, or is just a hard person, and all they ever post on Facebook is how blessed and wonderful their life is? Did I ever have that? I have a really good friend who is, I know this man very well. He is going through a really tough divorce right now. He's lost a series of jobs he really wanted and really needed, and he's trying to raise 2 baby girls on his own. And all he ever posts is how fluffy and wonderful his life is. And I don't mean to like get mad at somebody for bright-siding things. I think there's value in sharing, positivity. But the thing that he's doing that I feel like he's lying. He's pretending. And because it's on Facebook and most of these people are his friends in real life, we know he's lying. We know he's faking it. And it makes me feel like I can't trust him. Because he says one thing to his community on Facebook, and then he says something completely different when we're one-on-one. And I know that everybody has their different levels of comfort with dealing with social media, but I would love to see at least a little bit of his human sharing when he needs it. I know he needs that connection, but he's not asking for it. And that makes me a little bit frustrated. Anyway, let's get through here. So being anyone in front of anyone is really hard, but we have it harder as artists. Because we don't just share our feelings and thoughts with the world, we put our philosophies, our spirits, and our ambitions in front of the world with the expectation that the world will respond, as they should, because that's why we're putting it out there. To be an artist is to invite this conversation. And even if your art isn't biographical, many readers will think it is. My first 2 books are about lesbian werewolves. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people ask me, oh, are they memoirs? Seriously. So that was a fascinating conversation. The first time it happened, and by then I just started joking around with it. But my books are also really political. There are multiple competing feminisms happening in the book, which is what I wanted to try and represent that feminism is not a monolith. But people will often assign one of the feminisms to me as the author based on how much they like the book. So I found people thinking that I'm espousing one, but no one can ever agree on which one is mine. And here's a hint, none of them are. But people will decide on which one's mine based on whether they like me in it or not, and whether they think that my politics are right or not, which is a fascinating way of interacting with the public. You know? So it's terrifying to be an artist in contemporary society because we must be authentic. Art without authenticity is advertising. And to be authentic in public means that some people will hate you for it. Not just your work, but you. They'll critique you for being you, or for sucking in some way that you couldn't anticipate or prepare for. Or worse, they'll say you suck because they just don't get it. Which is kind of, for me personally, the hardest kind of sucking to feel. When somebody thinks that I suck because they just didn't get it. I published my first book in 2011. It's a new adult book about lesbian worlds, as we've heard. It's called Lunatic Fringe. It is not my best book. And that's how I want it. It wasn't even the best book I was capable of at the time. It was, however, the book I wanted it to be. It was a grand experiment of making something, cleaning it up a bit, sanding off the rough edges, putting a decent coat of paint on it, and giving it to the world. And seeing what happens. Spoiler alert, but yeah, it was, I wanted to create something to see if I could do it. From soup to nuts, I wanted to get it started and then get it finished and have it live on its own. I wanted to basically give birth to something, then watch it be its own person and fuck up in all the ways that a person fucks up. Because I'm fascinated by the process. I love the writing and I love the interaction too. I love learning about myself as I write. I love talking to people about process and product. I love making things. But I didn't think I could. My fascination with process meant that I could love art, be fascinated by the creation of it, but only as an observer, not a creator. I grew up in a working class family, and I learned that freedom came in the form of a diploma that would lead to a respectable job. And as an undergrad, I studied neuroscience with the ambition of becoming a researcher, or if I got really antsy, a surgeon. By the time I figured out my personality wasn't cut out for a lifetime of vivisection, I was nearly finished with my degree, so I just finished it. I spent most of my time in the theater department and was really envious of students, creating outdoor installations for their sculpture classes or creating a writing portfolio for their senior thesis. But I had internalized a lifetime of biting jokes about liberal arts degrees and snide comments about starving artists, and mostly pleas from my parents to have an easier time of it than they had. So I convinced myself that I could love art and love artists, but I could never be one. I had to get a respectable job supporting other artists on their path. So for the next 7 years, I ran an art gallery, I produced theater, I spent a very ill-advised and ill-wrought year in television, in Hollywood. I reviewed the Los Angeles arts culture for fun. But even when I was curating and producing, I still felt like artists were something other than me. That somehow they were endowed with a way of seeing the world that was unlike me. Artists were born, not made, in this warped philosophy of mine. And I let it dictate my life. I was actually, in retrospect, in the closet. I knew the life I wanted. I knew if given a chance I could do it, but I never gave myself permission to do it or even try it. I would write in secret, or only when drunk. I hid my predilections from myself. Seriously, I was in the closet and I was ashamed of my yearnings. Because I'm scared of what people would say or what people would think about me. Because this was actually a few years before Facebook became the thing that it is, and social media explosion. A female neuroscientist from a poor background, now a surgeon, like that was admirable. My parents could talk to their friends about this and be proud. But a writer living in Los Angeles, what a cliche. I didn't want to be that. So I hid. And I hid until one night, when my partner and I were talking about werewolves, as you do, and I mentioned the notion of female werewolves and how there weren't enough in fiction, and I recounted this conversation I had with, I lovingly call him a douchebag frat boy. I don't mean to say that all frat boys are douchebags or all douchebags are frat boys, but he happened to be both. And he just said, like, no one would ever want to read a book or watch a movie about female werewolves, because who wants to, you know, see a story about hairy, aggressive women? That sounds awesome. So I was sharing this story with my partner, and my partner was like, that sounds like a book. And I thought about it for about 5 minutes. I'm like, that does sound like a book. And then I thought about it for a couple more weeks. And then I'm like, actually, you know what? I want to write this freaking book. Like, something about the story, I don't really know what it was. I know that there were resonances with my own personal story that felt like I could do it justice, I could have fun with it. So I decided to write it. And I stopped thinking of myself as a steward for other people's artistic experiences or a midwife for other people's artistic expressions, and I decided to midwife my own book. So, 2 years later, my novel was on shelves and changing people's lives, or at least giving them a couple days of pleasure. There are a couple chapters that are but it was exciting. It was so exciting, and I would get these emails. I would get these emails from people who just responded to it, and it was the best high that I had ever had, because people were reading this thing, and they were having their own feelings and thoughts about it, and sometimes they saw things that I didn't mean, and sometimes that sucked, and sometimes it was awesome. But it was a new connection. It was a new relationship that didn't exist before. That was so exciting. So, backtracking a little bit before the book was out, though, when I finished the book, I was considering what to do with it. I polled every smart person I knew, and the answers came back almost evenly split between traditionally published, oh my god, you have to, or self-published, oh my god, it's the way of the future. And I decided to try and just play with both parallel paths, just to see how it felt. So I was researching self-publishing, learning a lot at the time, and then I started querying. And I sent my first query to a respected agent turned editor, and she told me that no one publishes new adult, and that I should rewrite it for teens. I know that a lot of you are meeting me for the first time, but I just want you to know this if you don't remember anything else. Graphic queer sex is kind of my jam. So I wasn't going to rewrite it for teens. It's just, the fisting scene had to stay. It just did. Anyway, sorry. Getting off track. So I sent more queries to more agents and did the whole thing, and I was told I should make the story straight, I should make it about vampires, not werewolves, because vampires are really hot. I should make it adult, I should make it YA, I should make it a romance, I should make it less political, I should make it more accessible. There was a whole slew of different ways I should change the book, which is fine. I absolutely appreciated all that feedback. It's all very useful feedback. But about 6 months into the process of the querying and waiting, I started to feel really terrible. But not like rejection terrible, like I don't have a problem really with that kind of rejection. It was just like this soul-crushing, like, wrongness of the process. So I had spent 2 years writing this novel, like breaking the seal on my creative life. And it was the most liberating, empowering, phenomenal experience of my life. And then in that 6 months of prostrating myself to gatekeepers, all of that joy, all of that liberation was just sucked out in the process. It didn't feel like me. And I don't want to you think that this is a self-publishing street, because it's not. It's absolutely not. I think there's a lot of value in both paths, and I have every intention of playing with them as many different venues that are possible for me in my career. But what was right about it was that when I thought about self-publishing, it just felt like me. Like when you do something, when you meet somebody and you're like, oh my god, like me? Yeah, like this is easy, you know? The self-publishing thing really felt like me because of the making. I liked the making. I didn't want to just write and then move on. I wanted to take these words and try and make them tangible and try and have a cover that represents what I'm trying to do. I thought I was really geeking out on every step of the process. And it was so me. The only thing that didn't feel me about self-publishing was the stigma, but I really have so I'm like, okay, fuck it, I'm still gonna do it. So I self-published. And so, again, it's not that self-publishing is good or bad or right or wrong. It's a plea, I guess. It's a request for authentic connection with not only the message but the medium, right? That the relationship, and when you talk to people like agents and editors, there's a real relationship that most of those people are looking to create. They want to have a dialogue that is really about creating the best beautiful product that can be created to deliver to the people who want it so badly. This is the connection that people are looking for. So when you're looking for the agent or the editor or the venue, it's about finding that fit that feels like a dance partner, that really feels like you can give them something and they're going to give something back to you. For me, that was doing it on my own and figuring stuff out as I went, because that's the kind of geek that I am. So, sorry. So, the thing that keeps authors from being willing to suck in public is fear. We are all afraid. Writing a book, even the most distant sci-fi, not at all about your life or kinks or desires, is a deeply intimate experience. We are, to various degrees, playing ourselves in front of the internet and asking them to poke and assess our innards. I self-published my first 2 books, and I'm going to soon self-publish the third to expedite the poking. I wanted to invite the poking. Just yesterday, I read a Twitter thread of a bunch of authors who I'd never heard of that were mocking self-published authors for no real reason. It was the Hugh Howey thing had come out, and people were responding to it in various ways. But the thing that I found really interesting is that the lack of gatekeepers goes both ways. My website doesn't say, like, contact so-and-so agent to give me the right to publish. It says, like, email address on the homepage, which means I get emails. But most of them are really kind and enthusiastic, some aren't. But to be honest, like, this is the point. This is my point. It may not be your point. This is my point. I got an email from a reader who said, hey, this might sound silly, but the campus you described in University of Fringe felt a lot like Oberlin, where I went to school. Am I nuts? And I got to write back and say, holy crap, you're good. I graduated in 2003. And we had this awesome dialogue back and forth on email where we were talking about what has changed on campus in the 10 years since I've been away. It was so cool. And I love that we had this, like, casual thing that just started because she was inspired to email me and found how to email me really quickly. So self-publishing for me was necessary so that I could have the privilege to do that on my terms, on my own timeline. Because when I was ready to do it, I wanted to be able to do it. And it was really about me being ready for it. We often, as writers, we define being a real writer, capital R, capital W, as being published. And I don't think this has to do much with, like, gatekeepers deeming you worthy, although some people really feel that way about it, which is, fine, like, to each their own. I think this gully really exists because there's a true and terrifying difference between creating something for oneself and creating it with the express purpose of sharing it with other people. It's the act of saying, I give this to you, and meaning it, that separates the amateur from the pro. So, to go pro, I think it's a pretty straightforward 5-step process. 1, you have to give yourself permission to write. No one else can give you permission to do it. I sat on my hands for 25 years wanting it, but I never gave myself the permission to do it. And once I did, it became obvious to me. But you have to give yourself the permission to do it. Some people have no problem with this. Some people feel shame of taking what they want. So if you're the latter, you have to give yourself permission, else you will never do anything ever. So give yourself permission. You have to believe that your voice is worthy. And for many of us, that's the hardest part of all. Step 2, you have to write. Duh. But again, like, that's where some people get lost, right? Like the ambition, I have writer's block for 15 years. That sounds like a bigger problem than writer's block, right? Go back to step 1 and then figure out how you do it. Step 3, you have to finish. Finishing looks a lot of different ways, especially now that self-publishing is in the ring. But you have to create a product. You have to, a discrete thing that can be enjoyed, shared, and understood to be at least a thing. It doesn't matter if it's a cereal with no end. law. You just have to create a thing that people can digest in whatever way that you want them to digest it. Step 4, you must share it with the world. Again, like you can do steps 1 through 3 and be a perfectly happy person. That's awesome. Like if you write for those reasons, steps 1 through 3, like good on you. I have no problem with that. It's beautiful. But if you want to be a pro, you have to share it. Creating in isolation isn't really being professional. And each one of these steps takes huge amounts of courage. I've seen so many people get stopped at each one of these steps because they get afraid of something. Sometimes it's stuff that needs to be worked out in therapy, about parent stuff. That's real. That happens all the time. But sometimes it's just you get stuck for some some reason that just isn't right. So you have to figure that out. And I'm going to get to step 5 in just a minute, but I want to go back to step 4 for a second. To be a writer, as most people define it, is to be a public figure. Even if your fandom is 3 people you'll never meet or want to meet. It's still how that works. There are writers who shout for others never to read their reviews, right? I've actually read this. I can't remember who it was, Melinda Lowe, who's a YA author in California, fantastic woman, fantastic writer. And she's like, I do not read reviews. And my ego thinks that is a great policy. I love that idea. But there's another part of me that is really excited about knowing what other people really think about me. Because unless it's gossip, like when else do we really have that opportunity to hear other people respond to the way we, like our viewpoint, our point of view, or the way we see the world? That's cool. So unless it's gossip, like knowing exactly what your wife's best friend's spouse thinks about you, what you said at that dinner party, it's totally off limits. But not if you're a writer. Ooh. You get to know every detail about exactly how much you suck. And it's actually really thrilling if you get the right perspective on it. And this actually might make me sound a little bit like a masochist, and maybe I am. As much as it hurts to read someone say horrible things, not just about my books, but the person they assume me to be, it's still wildly educational. I mean, sure, some people are easy to dismiss, and they should be dismissed before they, hold up too much space in my brain. And I think that's actually a really valuable thing around boundaries to learn as somebody who goes in public. Some people deserve to have their opinions really mulled, some people really don't. And that's something that you have to figure out for yourself. But even those people who don't like my books, especially those people, usually have something interesting to say about why they read what they read. Because these people are readers and they care. People who do not care are not going to write a screed about your book on Amazon or Goodreads. These people care about reading, and in a time when people are freaking out about publishing and the future of books, knowing that people are really invested in the stuff that you or anyone is writing is awesome. It's super awesome. It can be terrifying, but it's so good. And there's a certain viewpoint that you have to get into where you just find that stuff nourishing, even if it's weird and sucky, they totally misread you. It's still that they cared enough to not only read your work, but then respond to it in a public forum. And invite other people to respond to it. It's thrilling. The truth is that your dinner party conversation is not for public consumption, yet. But your books are. The ones in your drawer aren't, but I think they should be. And they can be. And I suggest that you consider making them so. Because sucking in public has given me something that I was missing in my own response to art. Like I said, I was reviewing theater and the art scene in Los Angeles for a really long time. And this was, again, the early blogging era. And I loved writing reviews of things, especially things that I hated. A lot of people might understand that feeling. It's really fun to try and figure out the cutting bon mot, Like the whole Dorothy Parker thing. But A, none of us are Dorothy Parker. B, there's cynicism that goes with reviewing things coldly and poorly, or like reviewing things for the indulgence and the hate. That doesn't really serve anything other than the critic's ego, right? So in creating something, putting it out there, I developed such compassion for art, for artists, and for people. Like I said, I'm an introvert because I'm kind of a misanthrope. Like, I'd rather spend hours on my own than minutes with people, So being a creator and a producer and a sharer of things, I had to have this very like let go and let God kind of philosophy. And it's taught me so much about vulnerability and how scared most people are just to be themselves in the world. Like if I may have had fine self-confidence just being a human being, or I could walk around without too much shame, which most people have all the time. And I could negotiate that with myself just as a person. But as an artist, I had to get to a really, really great working relationship with my ego. I had to really understand what drove me and what made me feel ashamed of myself, and that made me understand how most people walk around all the time. It made me understand that there's a lot of empathy that we have to have for other people, and bearing your guts in front of the public is one really great way of short-circuiting that and getting right to the message real quick. If making my art makes someone feel less weird or alone in the world, I am winning the frickin' game. And I'll actually keep winning, no matter how much I suck, because of step number 5. If going from amateur to pro requires you to give yourself permission to write, to finish, to share, then the step 5 is doing it all over again, every single time. Because a pro, even after getting bad reviews, angry emails, and haters from all sides, won't let that stop her from creating, finishing, and sharing. We cannot be afraid to suck in public, because public is where we find connection, our people, our voice, and our message, and the world needs that. I let myself not write for a long time because I thought that the world had too many white women talking about white women's problems. Here's the thing, it doesn't. I think that there need to be more women's voices in general. There need to be more people's voices in general in the world. And the only way you can do that is by sharing your voice. I cannot make yours up for you. And Michael Chabon cannot make yours up for you. You have to tell your story with your own voice, in your own way, because that is the only good stuff. That's the only real stuff. And the world needs those voices. I mean, it needs all of the voices. So the email thread the Twitter thread that I was talking about with those authors that were kind of making fun of self-published authors, they said, like, why would self-published authors tell other people to self-publish? Aren't you just creating competition? And I'm like, there's never been a person who didn't get it as much as that guy. Because in a world of self-expression, there's a room enough for all of the voices. Publishing is not a zero-sum game, right? The traditional market, the large big 5, is because in order to get that one slot, somebody else has to not get that spot. That's kind of how that works. Why I love self-publishing is it's democratic. We all have access to do it, which can create some of the that we have in the self-publishing world, which is totally legit. I just love the fact that people have the gall to actually share their voices with the world. That's totally enough for me. Because the new model of all of this is that everyone in the pool, we can find each other just fine. We have the filters. We can allow in what we want and turn away what we don't. We can find our voices and our people if we just give ourselves permission to share our voices. So this is my request. If you want to go pro, take something you've written, anything, although in a room full of writers and the people I've met today, I would recommend it's the scariest thing, the thing you don't want people to see, the thing that is too intimate, too real, too personal, too ultra. I would recommend you take that and you show it to some people. Just show it to some people. You can show it to your immediate community, people that you know aren't going to laugh and poke at you, or you can, go big and just put it out there. It's the breaking of the seal that takes you from amateur to pro. You have to take a risk and give yourself a chance to suck in public, and you may instead find that you shine.